Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Muse Writer Center. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Michael, as you may have heard. So we're a literary center. We're a creative writing center. We have classes. We have events like this one. We also do outreach. We go into schools. We go into senior centers and nursing homes. Work with the military and veterans. We work with both gifted and or at-risk youth. We work with like the brightest teenagers in the area and also the ones that are in the juvenile justice system. But we also, as I said before, have lots of classes. Bill's teaching a class right now for our military program that they met on Wednesday night. I saw you on Wednesday. And our fall class schedule is coming out in about a week. So if you're interested in taking a class in poetry, nonfiction, fiction, screenwriting, songwriting, we have lots of classes for beginners all the way to professional writers, and we'd love to have you join us. And I guess we forgot to put out some information, but I'll have it at the front where the book table. So by the way, there's a book table in the front. Some of you might have noticed it when you came in. I'm sure Bill would appreciate it if you bought his book, and he'll be around after the event to sign autographs and talk and everything. But
and there are also snacks in the room.
Yes, in the room on the right, as you walk back toward the front, it's our classroom number 2 has some light refreshments for you as well. You probably all know who Bill Glose is because you came to his book launch. So I think I'll not read this wonderful short bio because I think it's more fun to tell a story. You know, we should all tell stories how we know Bill. You know, when I moved back here, I'm from the area, and I moved back here. Bill's one of the first poets I connected with when I moved back here, and I believe I somehow got the gig of being the poetry editor for Portfolio magazine and published Bill's poem in there, and then he invited me to some things, and I invited him to some things, and we became friends. And his very first book, I have a blurb on the back of it, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it's my honor. My first blurb I ever wrote was for your book, and The Human Touch, which I think is probably in our library up front. So I'm very proud of all he's accomplished. He is not in the bio that I would have read or you might have seen. He is one of 3 finalists for the Poet Laureate of the Commonwealth of Virginia, which will be announced on July 1st. Oh wait, it's August 4th or whatever, 5th. So it hasn't been announced yet. So we're still hoping. You know, I think Bill has a very good shot. I think that my prediction is if Bill's not the Poet Laureate this time, he'll be the one next time. So I'd like to invite you all to silence your cell phones. I'll do that for myself as well, because we don't want to interrupt what he's doing. So here we go, silence the cell phone. And again, thank you so much for being here in our Literary Center. We're very pleased to have Bill Glose here to talk about his new book, All the Ruined Men.
Thank you very much, Michael. I want to thank the Muse Writers Center as well. Fantastic space for writers to come together, not just to take classes, but they also offer the space for writers to just come and socialize or to have quiet writing rooms. It's just fantastic what he's done with this. This is entirely out of his own mind that has brought this to
hundreds of other minds.
Yeah, but he's been the driving force. So All the Ruined Men is a book that was born of a passion I have for making sure that veterans are better understood. When I came home from my war, the Gulf War, I wrote a book of poetry that talked about my experiences and everything I saw and did. And then the wars kept going on. I have a friend, Brad Lawing, who we both went into the Army about the same time. We were college roommates, and then he stayed in and made a career out of it. And I talked to him one time in 2011, and he was getting ready to go out for his 7th hardship tour. When I was in, I just went on the one hardship tour. And a hardship tour is when you go somewhere that it's the conditions are too dangerous to bring your family. So oftentimes that's a wartime environment, but it can be for other things as well. My father went to Iran the year before the Shah was deposed. So he was there when Khomeini rose to power and all that crazy stuff was going on. And we were pulling our hair out back stateside, worried about him. So I know what it's like from the family side of things, and I know what it's like from the deployed side of things. But as I said, I just deployed the one time to a war zone, and my friend Brad was going out for his 7th deployment, his 5th time for a combat tour in the Middle East. And on top of that were the news reports about all the veteran suicides. That's not anything that I had ever considered myself, but it had me shaken to see the numbers. The reports were saying 22 veterans per day were committing suicide. And so with that in mind, I thought I wanted to write something that told the story, not of the horrific things that happen in war, but about the hardships that soldiers face when they come back home. Combat takes its toll, but so does coming home. So that's what the majority of this book is about. There are many ways that someone can fall apart, and there are many ways that they can be put back together again. And so I wanted to also show that each of these soldiers in the book that I write about are individuals. Their problems are not some cookie cutter thing where each one of them is the same and they all have the same solution. So in doing that, there were some who were injured in war, had disfigurements or brain injuries. There were some who were deeply religious going into war and lost their faith. There were some who came back with just an endless well of anger and didn't know how to handle it. So there were lots of different things that happened, and each person had their own story. Also, just being in the military is dangerous, not just at wartime, but during peace as well. Training exercises carry their own weight of problems. One of the people I write about in this book suffered a near miss on a parachute jump. All the soldiers in here are paratroopers, like I was in the 82nd Airborne. And so his problem was that after that near miss on the aircraft, he was too scared to ever go back up and jump again. And he had some other fears that he had never felt before. So I'm going to open with a reading from that story, but before I did, I wanted to share a little bit about what it means to be a paratrooper. Make sure I got my apples. While I was in the 82nd, I had 60 airborne jumps, and I was only injured once. I had one concussion, but in every mass tactical jump I was on, which is a battalion-sized jump, at least one person broke a leg. So there are a lot of injuries inherent just in jumping. A lot when people outside of the military think of parachuting, they think of what you see at a sports game, someone flying through the air, doing acrobatic moves, and then tiptoeing off at the 50-yard line, something like that. Well, those chutes are formed like the wing of an airplane. They're steerable, and you can slow them down and speed them up. The T-10s, that soldiers jump, the same in those pictures. They're just these round cups. And the object is for you to go down, straight down, as fast as possible. Because the longer you're in the air, the longer you're a target. So they drop you low and they drop you fast. When you hit 18 to 22 feet per second. When you jump, light forces carry their world on their backs in a rucksack. But when you're jumping, you've got a parachute on your back. So your rucksack, when you're in the plane, is strapped to your legs. Your rucksack's on your legs, your parachute's on your back, a reserve is on your stomach, your weapon is on your side, and then your helmet's on your head. You're loaded like a mule, and you're kind of waddling up the ramp to get into the plane, and you're stuffed in there as you fly around until it's time to jump. And when you jump, you're just so glad to finally get out and get this weight off of you. But then you've got this heavy ruck, which can weigh up to 100 pounds with all your equipment on your lap. And so when you jump out, they don't want you to hit with that extra weight. So there's a line that is hooked up to that. You have 2 quick release straps on your waist. You pull those, and the rucksack lowers about 15 feet below you, so that as you're falling, the rucksack is below you, and when that hits, that weight is no longer pulling on you, and you just hit with your own weight when you land, so less chance of injury. And it's on the short line so that you can pull it back and get that equipment you need. However, if you lower that equipment too soon, right when you jump out of the aircraft, you start oscillating, and then that can cause a problem. So you're not supposed to lower your equipment at 200 feet, and then at 100 feet, you pull a slip into the wind. You kind of tilt your parachute a little bit to slow you down just the littlest bit before you hit. Now, I have a video here that shows a lot of this happening. So let's see if. Oh, okay. Yeah, so it's going to start out in the aircraft, and but then we'll also see some of it from the ground, and then we'll also see a view of someone jumping with a camera. And I mentioned the line that you lower the rucksack. There's also, that's a yellow line. There's also a yellow line, the static line, that crisscrosses the back of your parachute and hooks into the plane. There are these steel cables that run along the ceiling, and you snap link into it. And then when you jump out of the aircraft, that static line pulls your parachute out. So you don't actually pull a ripcord or anything. It just, as you fall away from the aircraft, it pulls out. So this is inside of a C-141. We've got about 128 jumpers going out of one aircraft. You've got the Air Force crewman here. You see he's strapped into the aircraft. He's the only smart guy there. First guy in the door, he's watching the light to turn from red to green. There's a jump master behind him who will also give the instruction. You see the yellow static line. They go out both sides of the aircraft, about a half second apart. And you see they all have their equipment on their laps. And if you can kind of see, as soon as they go out, they're like thrown to the side from the prop blast. And then as soon as they do go sideways, their parachute opens and it yanks them back in. So you get a lot of opening shock when you first go out. Now you'll see we've got the aircraft flying overhead. We've got 5 C-141s, so they're dropping a little over 600 paratroopers. Very few of them come out at first, and you think, okay, it's nice, clear sky. We've got some paratroopers coming out, and in no time at all, the sky is going to be filled with chutes. So the lead aircraft, let me pause it here for just 1 second. They fly in what's called a staggered V. You've got the lead aircraft, and from this angle we can't tell, but the aircraft behind him is slightly higher, because when guys jump out, if it's lower, you can hit the aircraft that comes below. And I bring that up because that is something that happened in my unit. And it happened with C-130s, which have the rotors instead of the jets. And so a couple of guys were killed, and one guy was injured and frightened, which became the impetus for the story I'm talking about. But so let me get that going again. And you kind of see them yanking to the side as they go out, and they're just being tossed around like toys. And then, well, you can also see dragging on the side of the aircraft. Those are the deployment bags. I mentioned that the static line pulls the parachute out. What it's actually doing is it's pulling the deployment pack off of the parachute, allowing the parachute to open. But then all those deployment bags are dragging on the aircraft, and they've got to be yanked back in. You'll see that in a minute. So that's what those are. In addition to avoiding any obstacles you see on the ground, you've also got to avoid the heavy equipment that was dropped just before you went out. You might think, well, why did we drop the heavy equipment down there? It's going to be an obstacle for us to land on. You'd much rather land on heavy equipment than have heavy equipment land on you. And by heavy equipment, I'm talking artillery, crates of supplies, tanks. So what altitude do they jump from? When you go to jump school, you jump at 1,250 feet. When you get to the 82nd for your training jumps, you jump at 800 feet. And when you jump in combat, you jump at 500 feet. And no reserve, because there's not enough time to use it. If your main doesn't open, you hit the ground. But a main failure is pretty rare, and it's more dangerous to add that extra time in the air and be a target if it's a combat situation. But 800 feet, that's you have 4 seconds when you jump out. If you don't feel the opening shock, they say jump out and count to 4. If you count to 4 and you haven't felt the opening shock, you have to pull, because if you don't, again, you'll be hitting the ground. So when you jump out, you're supposed to jump out with your hands over your reserve and count 1, 2, 3, 4, and yeah. So you can also see, I mentioned the equipment lowering. You can see on some of the soldiers, when it zooms in, you'll see they've got the equipment hanging below them. And if they drop it too soon, you'll see some of them starting to oscillate. So there he's got his equipment and he's oscillating pretty hard. You got that guy just hanging up there up top. So this is the view of what it's like to actually jump. So we got someone jumping with the camera. This is not a mass tactical jumper, just a few people jumping here. Not jumping with equipment either. See, he gets shaken all over, turned sideways, back toward the plane. Yep. A few seconds of just fun under canopy. Yeah. Yeah. And then here comes the ground. And try to protect that camera. That is what it's like. And so the so what you're supposed to do when you land, yeah, and that's it for this. And what you do when you land, since you do hit so hard, whatever direction the wind is blowing you, I said at 100 feet you're supposed to pull a slip into the wind. So if you are slightly drifting in this direction, you would reach up and pull the two risers from the opposite side at 100 feet, pull it down into your chest. It would turn the cup of your parachute a little bit. It would collapse that side, and it would slow you for just a second before you hit. If you pull it too soon, then it starts creating that oscillating that I mentioned before. And then when you land, going in a certain direction, you do what's called a PLF, a parachute landing fall. So when you do the PLF, you're supposed to keep your feet and knees together, and you have 5 points of contact. You hit the balls of the feet, the calves, the thighs, the buttocks, and the push-up muscle. And you kind of curl your body like a banana, and you roll onto the ground. So you spread the impact out across your whole body. If you do what's called a straight leg landing, there's a good chance you'll break your legs if you land with your legs apart and just straight down. Those are the people that snap their legs. So there is that. So this story that I'm just going to read a few pages from it. This is Red Legs, and it involves that incident I mentioned, but it also opens in Richmond. So any fans of Richmond, there are a lot of Richmond details here in the beginning. Anoush loves the industrious way municipal workers scrabble about Richmond, wrangling order from chaos, and I love her for that. Our perfect date is not dining at Shockoe Bottom's trendy cafes or strolling through Louis Ginter's domed conservatory, but setting out well before the morning rush to watch street sweepers scrub curbs, recycling trucks fork up rows of blue plastic bins, and patrol cars nestle their rear ends into nooks, ready to pounce on swervers returning from an all-night binge. To her, these excursions are backstage passes to a favorite show, a blue-collar ballet of men in steel-toed boots removing yesterday's detritus and assembling scenery for today's performance. Most residents have no idea how much sweat it takes to clear away their daily clutter, but Anoush knows, and she revels in the sense that any wrong can be put right. You might too, if you were dying. This morning, a Saturday, yellow-vested police are laying cones and sawhorse barricades to block off streets for today's marathon. Crowds of cheering supporters will cluster on Main Street and Broad, but we take up positions south of the James on Semmes Avenue, around mile 21, the point where racers cross over the river and re-enter downtown. It's November, and we huddle together with a tartan blanket wrapped around our shoulders, our backs to a 4-story brick apartment building with a row of tiny shrubs. Except for downtown's glass buildings on the horizon, the view is gray. Anoush brought a heel of bread to tear up and toss at ducks or any other birds foraging at this hour. But all we see are a pair of crows perched on a telephone wire. Anoush throws the bread into the street. Nothing happens for a beat, then one of the crows falls off the wire and glides toward the bread. The crow stands near the heel, investigating, its head jerking toward us, then back again. It scratches up the bread and lifts off with its heavy wings beating the air like someone pounding dust from a rug. Then the other crow descends from the wire and gives chase across the river. From our vantage, 6 lanes of blacktop stretch north toward the Robert E. Lee Memorial Bridge. It's impossible to go anywhere in Richmond without bumping into a reminder of its antebellum roots. Names of bridges, roads, and fields, generals mounted on bronze steeds, the 90-foot pyramid rising out of Hollywood Cemetery, a grand monument erected for the Confederate dead. Everything casting wistful light on a supposedly nobler era. Regiments of reenactors mustering in gray waistcoats and breeches, replaying victorious battles as if repetition were enough to erase the losses. A rewrite of history was exactly what I wanted a year and a half ago. Medically discharged from the Army and back on the family farm in Montana. I wasn't missing any body parts, so my sudden return was met with suspicion. Neighbors and high school friends cast sideways glances. On trips to town, conversations would hush when I came near. And at home, my father couldn't look me in the eye. In Big Sky country, reasons didn't matter, just results. I tried to lose myself in swishing fields of golden wheat. I charged into them in the big green combine, heads popping off their stalks and rattling in the bin like distant gunfire. When I wasn't working, I hiked the flathead rim rocks rising out of the south until my muscles burned. Long ago, I loved scaling the steep cliff face to get to the top, but that version of me died in the skies over Fort Bragg. The version that came home took the gentle path, winding to the top. Once there, I would dare myself to stand on the edge with my boots hanging over the lip, but I never came close. I'm going to skip ahead just a minute. So now they're back looking at the race. Please tell me you brought something to warm us up, Anoush says with a tipping motion toward her mouth. She's shivering slightly in her ripped jeans and windbreaker, no makeup, dark crescents under her eyes, long hair knotted behind her head and held together with a rubber band. I retrieve a thermos of coffee from the back of my Civic, and a puff of steam escapes when I unscrew the cap. Filling 2 paper cups, I hand one to Anoush. She holds it close to her mouth, blowing across the black liquid before taking a sip. Was kinda hoping for something with a little more kick, she says. You know, hair of the dog. Last night we had dinner at Cafe Gutenberg, where a wild-haired poet recited erotic poetry to the titillated diners. We came home with the poet's new book and a bottle of Hypnotique, a blue liqueur made from vodka and cognac. Passing the book back and forth, one of us read aloud while the other sipped and stripped off a piece of clothing. Once the bottle was dry and our bodies naked, we made love on the couch, then retired to the bedroom for a repeat performance. No hair of the dog, I say, just coffee. Probably a good thing. I'm still a little drunk. She takes another sip and scans the surroundings. Not much to see, but Anoush is content. We haven't visited this spot before, and that's all that matters. She's lived in Richmond most of her life, but until her terminal diagnosis, she never explored the city beyond her own neighborhood. Now she seeks out its hidden wonders, trying to cram into her remaining time as many experiences as possible. Eating in the dark at a blacked-out restaurant served by a blind waitstaff. Walking atop the pipeline on the north bank of the James, following it past spits of beach and beneath elevated train tracks. Strolling through Jackson Ward and Hillside, snapping pictures of the homeless with her 35mm Canon. I always ask her not to venture into rough neighborhoods until I get back from work, but she hates to wait. She goes alone and tells me about it afterwards, giddy from the thrill of her solo journey. One time, she got mugged on Franklin, not far from the main library. She'd been admiring the architecture of Greek Revival row houses, the Doric columns and elaborately carved cornices, when a man in a gray hoodie stepped out from a shadowed doorway. "Your purse and camera," he said, with a jut of his chin, holding out his hand, unhurried, like he was just asking for the time. Knowing this day might eventually come, Anoush had rehearsed defiant retorts in her bathroom mirror. But that night she said nothing, handing over her possessions without a peep. The mugger sauntered off with his prize. He didn't even have the decency to run off, she told me later, after the shaking stopped, after her initial shock morphed into rage. I heard the hurt and fear in her voice, but mostly the shame. Shame of submission, shame of her mute response, shame of not living up to the strong self-image she'd created for herself. Holding Anoush in my arms, I searched for the right thing to say to set her world right again. The only cure I could think of was to offer my confession, the story of my last true day as a paratrooper. The nightmare always begins the same way, with 64 paratroopers crammed into a C-130, sitting shoulder to shoulder in the cupped mesh of 4 rows of bench seats. I'm fourth in the stick behind Jankovic, Zeke, and Toomey. The plane is stuffy and our grease-painted faces are flecked with sweat. Parachutes on our backs force us to lean forward against rucksacks that are tied into harnesses sitting on our laps. Loaded like mules, we rock in sync with each of the plane's judders as it rumbles toward the drop zone. Toomey is telling me about a surprise birthday party being planned for his girlfriend. He wants me to come along, says there will be other girls who are hot for paratroopers. Come on, Parker, he says, live a little. Beneath his Kevlar, Toomey's smile stretches from one jug ear to the other. I'm smiling too, and why not? Parachuting is an adrenaline rush like no other, especially night jumps, the thrill of stepping into pitch black, the prop blast throwing you sideways, the sudden jerk as a static line yanks your parachute open, then floating under silk as the roaring planes rises up out of the dark. Inside the plane, the only interior lights turned on are in the back, 2 red globes by the side doors. When the doors slide open, cool air tongues the suffocating tube, and jump masters lean into the howl of night, camouflage fabric of their pants snapping in spastic glee. They check for anything that might snag a static line, running hands along the door's trailing edge as if caressing a lover. Turning back toward the seated men, the jump masters give hand signals and scream orders to be heard over the engines. Stand up, hook up, check equipment. We rise from our cargo seats and fasten snap links into the overhead cable. Each jumper examines the parachute of the man in front, tracing the yellow static line zigzagging down his back like bootlaces, the last check for knots and tangles. Missing one could cost the life of the man in front. Though these umbilicals will not be tonight's fatal error, that will be the orientation of the staggered V of planes. The one behind ours should be slightly higher, but this is its pilot's first parachute run, and he's flying low. When the interior light turns green, the jump masters scream go, and we all shuffle forward in our shiny Corcorans. Time slows down as I step to the lip of the door and leap. I can see each of them. Jankovic, Zeke, Toomey, falling into the churning blades. As I tumble after, the trailing plane noses up enough so that the rotors barely catch my chute, shredding the canopy and slapping me against the fuselage before I fall away. In real life, I pulled the ripcord on the reserve parachute and only suffered a concussion, a dislocated shoulder, and a few broken ribs. In the dream, there is no reserve strapped to my belly, and I fall into bottomless black. So that's the only parachuting episode in the book. As I said, most of what I wrote about in here is about soldiers after they come home. So that one soldier, he's suffering from the fear of that near miss, and it's affecting the way he looks at the world afterwards. For other soldiers, there can be the difficulty with how to deal with your family. You know, when you're deployed constantly, over and over, you're gone from your family for half the time often. And so how the relationships, how that affects the relationships and how you deal with that, that's something I wanted to make sure I covered. So I'm just going to read this one passage, and then we'll do some Q&A. So this is for a character named Mueller. Sophia and I stand on the threshold of her old bedroom at her parents' house in Princeton. In a guest room down the hall, our 3-year-old daughter, Chrissy, is bouncing on a king-size mattress big enough for the 3 of us. Her bed at home with a Little Mermaid headboard is only twice her length, but that's plenty of space for her and George, the stuffed panda she only sets down to take a bath or go potty. 2 or 3 times a week, she'll shuffle into our bedroom with George dangling at her side, climb into our double bed, and snuggle between us without a word. On those nights, I'll kiss her forehead and study her heart-shaped face, a duplicate of her mother's, thinking, what I wouldn't do for you. Sophia says I spoil Chrissy. But what choice do I have? Absent half her life, I have to work twice as hard to make the time count. A paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division, I go where the Army sends me, serving my first tour while Chrissy was growing in her mother's belly. 11 months in Iraq while she was nursing, then 6 more in Afghanistan as she took her first steps. Each time I come home, I'm a stranger to my own daughter. When I'm gone, I live in hallway pictures and on the computer screen as her mother Skypes. When I'm finally there in the flesh, it's hard for her young mind to connect the one-dimensional image with the 3-dimensional reality. My face might wear the same brown hair buzzed high and tight, and the same scar bisecting my left eyebrow, but it still seems foreign. It still seems wrong. Her tiny body will squirm when I hold it against my wiry frame, her own arms squeezing George in a death grip as she struggles to break free. Months later, after she's grown used to me being around, I'm off again. Then it's my leg she's clutching as she wails, "Don't go, don't go." George tossed aside in a heap. Okay. Thank you. So I am open for any questions anybody has, and after we finish up the Q&A, like I said, there's some snacks, and you can do any signings for anybody that wants to pick up a book. But any questions anyone has? Yes, Ron.
Earlier, I didn't understand one thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned a paratrooper or a soldier coming home to his family, and that people around gave him some askance looks. I didn't understand why.
Yeah. So when he came back, the line before that was that there was nothing wrong with him, and so he had been medically discharged from the service, and the reason he was medically discharged is because he was too scared to perform his duties. And so when he came home, you know, the community where he's in, they didn't see him with a prosthetic leg. They didn't see him with any scars. It's like, you know, you're still supposed to be in the Army. What are you doing back? Are you a deserter? Are you, you know? So it's that kind of attitude that people can have with, you know, mental issues.
I must have really hurt.
Yeah. So as happens in this story, and then as he's dealing with his issues, his girlfriend Anoush has the terminal diagnosis. So they have the two sides of it. She's trying to be braver than she feels like, and doing challenging things, while he's feeling like he can't be brave enough to do the things he wants. So there's that dichotomy going on. But yeah, when I just take a little section out, it misses some of the context.
Well, that makes it very clear.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit about your process writing stories as opposed to poems, Bill.
Mhm.
How do you know at what point, what you're writing is going to be a poem or a story? Are there images that come to you or titles that come to you, that kind of thing?
Certainly. Well, this is not a plant. So I do have actually a rough draft here. So this is the third version of a story I'd been working on. And you can see, at this point, it's still going into version 4. I'm making scads of editing marks still. And I continued on like this until about version 8. When this story starts, so this story is called Dog is Not a Palindrome. When I got the idea for it, it was originally, the concept was, well, first off, I'm a dog lover. I love, I love dogs. They're my favorite animals, and I love all animals, but I'm especially a dog lover. It's hard for me to go buy one without jumping on it and rolling around with it. But so I thought one of these soldiers coming back that's having terrible difficulties, I thought about having him adopt a dog that had had a rough time from the pound, to make a habit of doing that. And in trying to work with the dog and fix it, it would in turn fix him as well. So that was my idea for the story that had come to me, being a dog lover. And my friend Dawn here, she has rescued a lot of dogs from the pound, and one that she got had been abused. It had cigarette burns on its belly. And once Dawn got it, it led a wonderful life. And so I was thinking, so all of those thoughts kind of blended together to come up with a story. But once you start writing the story, once you get into it, the story often will lead you in a different direction. The adopt a dog idea faded out, and I still had the troubled soldier, but he was working pool construction, and the abused dog was in the, or the neglected dog, that kind of abuse, was in the yard next door, and it was howling at them as they're doing the pool construction. And it just brings back memories of Iraq and Afghanistan. And then he tries to do something for the, so there's still some of that trying to save yourself. So the gem of the idea came from something from my personal history and something that interested me. But then once you get into the story, more so for me anyway than with the poem, the story will take me in the direction it wants to go. So that story did change quite a bit, and I'm really pleased with how that one turned out. It was hard to write too, because there were some bad things that happened to some dogs in here, and I'm such a dog lover, so that was hard.
We'll follow up with her question.
Yeah.
How do you know what's a poem and what's a story when you start writing?
For me, if there's something I don't understand, but I want to pick at a little bit, that tends to be a poem, where I look at the images of something, the feelings of something, just the raw experience of it, but I'm not seeking out any answers. I'm not, working out any story that goes with it. I don't understand this. I just want to write something about it. That will tend to be a poem. And those can be very surprising also, what, crops up in those, but they still tend to stick in the same frame. With a story, that tends to be more if I get to start to want an answer. I want to know what happens with this guy when he does try to rescue the dog. How does that affect him? Where does that lead him? When it gets to be, you know, a bigger story, when you start looking at the character's wants and desires and how he or she can achieve them or be blocked from achieving them, that's where, you know, to me, it starts becoming a story. Mhm. Oh, yes. Yes.
Oh, big difference between Desert Storm, the Gulf War, and Iraq and Afghanistan.
Mhm.
How did you close that gap, technology-wise and other ways, between the two wars that you experience one and not the others?
Oh yeah, because you're absolutely right. Those two wars, the Gulf War and then the continuing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, were different creatures altogether. In my war, we were fighting true desert warfare, attacking bunker complexes, going over sand. Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of that was fought against insurgents where, you know, you didn't know who they were in the populace. There were all the roadside bombs they had to deal with, and it was town to town. It was kicking down doors, and so they were very different creatures. I had to do a lot of research to figure out the what was actually going on, what unit was where and when, and how they were fighting. I looked up videos, I read books, I did all of that. However, as I said, most of what I write about takes place at home. There's the opening story takes place entirely in Iraq, but it's earlier on, before the IEDs started happening. If you recall, during the Iraq invasion, not the Gulf War, but the next Iraq invasion, when the statue of Saddam came down, and everyone thought this is it. Everybody thought that moment of celebration, it was over, and it wasn't. It was just beginning. So that's kind of when that story takes place. But then the rest of it coming home, that's something I know and can experience, even though specifically what happened to me and the soldiers I served with was different from the soldiers of today. But coming home, it's dealing with the same issues. Yeah. Okay, if anybody has any further individual questions, I will be around, and you can just ask me in person. But like I said, we do have some refreshments in the side room over there, and I'd love to chat with each of you up front. So thank you for coming.